Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really esoteric and honestly deeply fascinating philosophical lecture that outlines a massive, supposed spiritual turning point in human history. And get this, it's centered right around the current year, 2026. So let's jump straight into it. The source material we're unpacking presents this radical timeline of human evolution, basically suggesting that we are standing on the precipice of a totally unprecedented shift in human consciousness. Whether you look at this as literal truth or just a really intriguing philosophical framework, the concepts presented here are incredibly structured and definitely give us a lot to think about. So, according to the source material, this inflection point isn't some political event. It's not a technological singularity or some sudden economic crash. Rather, it's a fundamental shift in how humanity must think and operate within the universe. The speaker pinpoints July 2026 as the absolute critical halfway mark of this transition. It's described as this watershed moment where the old ways of living just simply won't work anymore, and a new era of spiritual application becomes absolutely mandatory. To make sense of all these massive concepts, we're going to follow the lecture's four-part chronological journey. We'll look at human evolution and the inflection point, the cost of regression, South Korea's specific role as the root nation, and finally, the spiritual era and human gods. Starting off with Section 1, Human Evolution and the Inflection Point. The lecture starts by laying down a baseline for our history. It argues that for eons, humanity was essentially stuck in Step 1, the evolution phase, primarily just trying to survive and develop our basic forms. Then we moved into Step 2, the growth phase, where we built up our intellect, our cultures, and our societies. But right now, the speaker argues we're crossing the threshold into Step 3, the application phase. We're moving out of this incredibly long period of just accumulating knowledge and into a critical phase where we actually have to actively use what we've built. The speaker actually puts a metric on this, claiming humanity has hit a 70% completion mark in our growth. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, it means the environment for basic human development, the accumulation of data, technology, societal structures, is entirely finished. At 70%, the container is built. We literally can't just keep growing in the traditional sense anymore. We have to start utilizing what we've spent millennia building. And the source draws a really stark contrast here. It views our past as, frankly, animalistic, living just to eat, survive, reproduce, and grow our numbers. But this new, spiritual future demands an entirely different motivation. In this new phase, humanity's whole purpose shifts to applying our accumulated knowledge to guide others and actively benefit global society. It's a massive pivot from basic self-preservation to collective elevation. Which brings us to Section 2, the cost of regression and nature's warning. The source is very clear that this transition, it's not optional. Let's see what allegedly happens if humanity stubbornly clings to the old animalistic ways of living during this new application phase. The lecture outlines a strict 3-year preparation window for this global mindset shift. 2025 is year 1 of preparation. 2026 is year 2, with July acting as the absolute critical halfway point, and 2027 is year 3. The speaker stresses that because we've just crossed that July 2026 mark, the stakes are incredibly high right now. The window to willingly adapt is closing rapidly. And here's the catch. The lecture firmly states that living backward, or stubbornly refusing to evolve past our survival instincts, is going to invite severe natural consequences. The source literally calls this nature's punishment. The logic here is that the universe operates on these strict laws of energy and progression. So if humanity tries to swim against the current of universal law by staying in a primitive mindset, the sheer friction of that resistance is going to result in unavoidable, widespread hardship. Moving right along to Section 3, South Korea, the root nation. To understand how we're supposed to navigate this transition, the lecture shifts geographically, placing a massive philosophical weight on South Korea's specific role. This quote hits the nail on the head regarding the source's core metaphor. Think of human society like a giant, ancient tree. While Western nations and the rest of the world represent the sprawling branches and the leaves, expanding outward and gathering resources, South Korea acts as the foundational root. The philosophy suggests that for thousands of years, this root has been hidden, quietly absorbing energy and growing strong, totally unnoticed by the branches. So how exactly does a hidden root suddenly lead the world? Well, according to this philosophy, the global explosion of Korean culture, the Korean wave or Hallyu, isn't just some entertainment trend. It's not just about catchy pop music or viral dramas. The source claims this is a deliberate, natural mechanism meant to expose this root nation to the rest of international society. The whole globe is suddenly looking at Korea because, supposedly, it is time for the root to be revealed. But with that massive global exposure comes a pretty heavy burden. The speaker argues that South Koreans are now destined to become the ultimate spiritual role models to guide the rest of the world. They're actually described in the lecture as heaven's descendants. Because the spotlight is squarely on them now, if they act poorly, the philosophy warns that the natural punishment will hit them the absolute hardest. But if they step up and rise to the occasion, they are meant to map out the right path for global peace. And finally, Section 4, the spiritual era and human gods. This brings us to the ultimate destination of the lecture. If the root nation guides us and we successfully shift from survival to application, what does that new world actually look like? The source describes it as an era of unprecedented spiritual and energetic mastery. To understand this era, the source radically redefines the whole concept of God. In this framework, God isn't a supreme external deity sitting on a cloud that we pray to. Instead, God is the literal, total, fundamental energy of the universe. It is the microparticles, the forces of nature, the vast networks of information that make up reality itself. God is the energy, and the energy is God. This is a massive paradigm shift. In the past, the speaker notes, human religion was all about kneeling, begging, and subservience to external deities or spirits, basically just hoping they would swoop in and solve our problems. But in the spiritual era, that behavior is considered totally outdated. This new era requires humans to actively operate and utilize that universal energy ourselves. We're no longer the subjects begging for scraps. We're meant to be the active operators. Because we are the ones now wielding this universal energy, the source argues that humans are meant to step up and operate as human gods, or Ingan Shin in the original text. Now, a human god isn't some arrogant egomaniac. It's defined here as a spiritually evolved individual who takes on immense responsibility. They use their intellect and their spiritual maturity to operate the universe's energy and information for the benefit of all mankind. But how do you actually wield that kind of power? Well, the crucial takeaway here is that in this spiritual era, information itself is literal energy. The knowledge, the data, the wisdom we possess, those are the raw materials of spiritual power. Mastering this information, filtering it with real wisdom, and then wielding it to solve society's contradictions is exactly how these human gods will guide humanity forward. It's this ultimate merging of high-level intellectual knowledge and deep spiritual responsibility. The lecture leaves us with a really profound ultimatum. As we pass through this 2026 inflection point, the universe is allegedly asking us to make a choice. Are you going to remain in the past, living merely to eat, survive, and consume? Or will you adapt to this universal law, master the energy of information, and step up to live a truly spiritual life as an active operator of reality? The choice, according to the source, is entirely ours, but the consequences of that choice will literally shape the future of human history. So, what's your next move?